Hi, my name is Pastor Sarah Olson Smith. I am one of the pastors at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Davenport, Iowa, and the writer of this fall's Bible study for Gather magazine. This fall we are looking at the teachings of Jesus about nature and the way that nature can be a teacher for us about who God is and how we can be God's people in the world. In November we are looking at God's creatures and the stories Jesus told about creatures. Jesus spent a lot of time outside. Jesus didn't have a big conference hall or a fellowship hall or a lecture room. Instead, Jesus sat down outside among his people and told stories, looked around and noticed the world around him and allowed that world around him to be a teacher with him. So Jesus told stories about sparrows and hens and foxes and sheep and all kinds of creatures. And those creatures will be the basis for our study in November. I don't have any pets of my own, so unfortunately I'm not here with an adorable puppy or cats around me. Instead, I'm here with my bird feeders. During the pandemic, we spent a lot of time watching birds. We put these bird feeders out and we spent a lot of time looking out our window and watching the birds come. We mostly just had sparrows and wrens. Every once in a while, a cardinal would come. One time we had a goldfinch. There's a big hawk that spends a lot of time in the big pine trees next door to us, and some crows who spend time there too. There's some beautiful geese that fly over a bunch, and ducks at the pond nearby. A bunch of squirrels and chipmunks here in our backyard. But we would watch birds, spending so much time watching birds. And I remember just a few months ago when I was writing this study that I saw a bird on the telephone wire outside of our house, and it looked really unique, like a bird I hadn't seen before. And so I looked, and I'm like, what is it? What is that bird? I got our bird book and was trying to figure it out. So I went outside and I very closely walked towards it to see what kind of bird this was. And as I got closer, I realized that it was a sparrow. Just a sparrow. And I said to myself, oh, nothing special, just a sparrow. And as I said that, it struck me that maybe to me it's just a sparrow. But Jesus was the one who said, this sparrow, are not two sparrows, a sparrow sold for 2 pennies or 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and how much value they have to God. So much worth you have for me too. In God's eyes, these creatures, even a sparrow, a common, ordinary sparrow, is beloved and cherished. As that old gospel hymn says, God's eye is on the sparrow, and I know God watches over me. Each one of God's creatures is so beloved to God, and Jesus teaches us, models for us how we too might see God's creatures, even a common, ordinary sparrow, as beloved. That bird on a wire reminds me of that old song from Peter, Paul, and Mary. Maybe you sang this as a kid, or maybe you still do, where it called All God's Critters Got a Place in the Choir. And when I think something like, all God's critters got a place in the choir, some sing low and some sing higher, some sing out loud on a telephone wire. Some just clap their hands or paws or anything they got now. I love that song, and I think in many ways that song is a sort of key for us about what I hope we can gain from this study together this November. That we are, with all of God's creatures, a part of this choir, all created and all loved by God, all part of this great critter choir, all creatures. The hippopotamus and the bullfrogs and the honeybees who are humming and the crickets who are playing their violin. We all gather together to sing praise and give glory to God. We as humans are creatures among creatures. We are mammals. We are God's people, and not some sort of prima donnas grand soloists who sort of have the rest of creature set up a stage for us, or upon whom we can stand so that we can have our own glory and for everyone else's destruction. We often see ourselves as humans as somehow set deeply apart from the rest of creation, where all the rest of creation can serve us. But instead, so much of the biblical story is a reminder to us that we are, as humans, a part of this incredible creation. God's vision is not one of anthropocentricity, where this kind of human-centered vision of the universe. But instead, God offers us another vision of interdependence, of mutuality, of reciprocity, where we take and where we give, where we all can flourish on behalf of God's world. There's this beautiful way that we can be in the world, where we are not the center of the world, where all creation doesn't serve us, but we stand in this great choir singing praise to God. We read about this in Job. In November, we're going to take another field trip from Jesus and his stories to the book of Job. And in this book of Job, there's this conversation that God has with Job. And here it is. God talks to Job about creation. And so the Lord, this is from Job chapter 38. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is it that darkness counsel by words without knowledge? Gird your loins up. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk, and who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together, and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? It goes on and on and on about storehouses of snow and a channel for the currents of rain who gave birth to the world, where it says, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? Do you number the months that they fulfill? Or it says, is it the wild ox willing to serve you? Will it spend the night at your crib? Talks about the horse and the ostriches. It says, God says, is it by your wisdom that the hawk soars and spreads its wing toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes its nest on high? Over and over again, God talks about the beauty and the wonder of creation and these all sorts of playfulness and all sorts of joy. And Job answers, it's so beautiful. Job answers, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore I have uttered that I do not understand things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. God speaks out of the whirlwind and names this incredible, beautiful truth that God is God and we are not. And then invites Job to find peace and wholeness and courage and freedom and community in this truth, that God is God, God who made this world and knows in intimate ways every one of God's creatures, including us, loves us and cares for us. But we are not God. God is God and we are not. And in this we can find our place in creation, right alongside all of God's beautiful ones who God has made, all part of this great choir. I believe there's such freedom and such joy in this, as well as a sort of renewed responsibility. As God's people, we as humans, we have some special responsibilities in this choir of ours. We are named God's own, God's beloved, just like all of creation, but we have a responsibility as God's creatures to our kindred to be good stewards of this world that God has made, to care for it so that we and all of God's creatures might flourish. We can claim that responsibility not in a sort of domination or dominion, but instead with a sort of shared responsibility for our siblings, whether they have fur or fins or feathers or scales. These beloved creatures of God are kindred with us, all part of this choir. And so we can, as God's people, as followers of Jesus, care for and tend for this world and for our creation so that we can live into this vision that God has, that where all creation thrives. In Paul's letter to the Ephesians, Paul writes about this great coming together of all the world, where all of God's people will come together into one. In Ephesians, it talks about this great vision. And Dan Erlander, Saint Dan Erlander, a pastor and an artist and a visionary, drew a picture of what this could look like for us as we think about this vision of God's great pulling together of all creation, this great fulfillment. We pray every week, God, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And if we believe in this vision of this great someday, when God will gather together all of creation, where all creation can thrive, we can begin to live that now. I want to show you this picture from Dan Erlander's book, Manna and Mercy. In this book, you can see here this beautiful drawing. I'll show you there. Isn't it amazing? This is the great Ananekphalaisothathai. I said this crazy, beautiful Greek word, Anekphalaisosthai. This great coming together of all God's people. In that picture, you might have seen that it's not just all of God's creation that gathers around Jesus, but kangaroos and lions and birds and snakes and earthworms and some groundhogs. At this great end, we can trust that God will gather together all the world into one. And now, today, as followers of Jesus who taught us to consider the birds, we can continue to live that in partnership with all of God's creation, critters in the choir. So I pray that this November in your study, whether you are studying it alone or in a community, that you might find renewed joy and purpose as a creature among creatures, that we can celebrate our own being mammals, that we as are God's creatures. And there's a beautiful gift in this, even as we claim our special responsibility as humans in this world. Have fun with this study. Think about those animals that have blessed your life and the ways that we can live in renewed reciprocity and care for God's creatures around us. Have some fun, and thank you. Thank you so much for these last months for using the study in your own circles and in your own prayer life. I pray that it blessed you and that through you, this whole creation can be blessed. And through us all, we can be a part of restoring and protecting and caring for this incredible world that God has made and entrusted us with. Many blessings to you. Have a great time. Thank you.